Greetings, Steinberger fans. My name is Andy Yakubek, and I've been a Steinberger collector, documenter, and historian for over 2 decades now. I got my start on the old Steinberger World Yahoo forums and website, and I'm still active on social media. Recently, there was a book published about Ned Steinberger, A Story of Creativity and Design by Jim Reilly. It's a fascinating deep dive into Ned's personal history and his innovative spirit. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, the planned promotion for the book didn't happen. I wanted to see what I could do to help that along. So I did a recent Zoom call with Ned and Jim to discuss the book in detail. Here's that chat. Enjoy. So, Jim, we've got you there?
I'm here.
Ned?
I'm here.
And obviously we're talking about this book today, Steinberger, A Story of Creativity and Design. I guess the first question will be for you, Jim. What kind of was the spark for doing this book?
So I guess the longer story was connected with Ned. So I wrote Emmett Chapman's biography, the guy who invented the Chapman stick, and the technique that he developed into the instrument. And met Ned through that because, of course, Ned and Emmett had done some work together and kind of went back and forth a little bit with Ned over the years, a little bit of promotional writing for NS Design and that kind of stuff years ago. But full disclosure, I had in the back of my mind that when I finished the Emmett book that I was going to do the Ned book next. So the Emmett book came out and I emailed Ned and I said, oh, the book's ready. I'd like to send you a copy. What's your address? So he sends me his address. I send him the book. And then a month or so later, he emails back and says, Jim, the book was great. It's really great and nice to be included and such. And I emailed him back and said, good, glad you like it. How would you like to be next? And that was the spark that sort of started it. And really it was kind of continuing that discussion about creativity and how that creative impulse manifests itself. And I always, the kind of piece, and we can talk about this too, is manifesting itself in what it on the surface looks like an unlikely character. But as you dig a little bit deeper, it becomes really, really obvious that, that Ned Steinberger is the only person that could have done what Ned Steinberger did. So that was the impetus, was really to explore that creative impulse and how that manifests itself. And that was, again, that was a few years ago now, but just sort of started that conversation and we went back a little bit before Ned actually committed to it. And then, then we dove off and took off on, again, sort of a multi-year conversation and dialogue with other people, interviewing other people, and really digging into that idea of creativity. And how that exists and manifests.
I'm particularly aware of differences between myself and Emmett Chapman, who I admire greatly. The big difference in terms of our work is that Emmett was building instruments for himself, which yes. had a wider application, and he had his eye towards inspiring other people, but he made it work for himself first, and then brought it to a larger public and proved the point by playing it beautifully and showing people what could be done with this new technique and new instrument. That's a polar opposite to me.
Yeah.
I have very, very little musical talent, and I'm exclusively about the instrument itself and I get a lot of input from players and so on, rather than creating something that I see as desirable for me. I'm looking to how this tool could be of service to musicians.
Yeah.
So we have go ahead, Jim.
It's from that design element, Ned, and that's kind of where I see the overlap between what you're doing. So yes, Emmett is playing for himself, and that's still his impetus for moving the instrument forward, is to make the best instrument for himself. And where they overlap again is that with that design idea. So you're approaching it from that design and the ergonomics, and right from the start with the Spectre NS base and that design, which again kind of came out of left field and was game changing there as well. That design and the best playable instrument was your motivation as well, and continues to be.
That's it. These are tools, and it was a great pleasure for me to have an opportunity to work with Emmett on the NS stick. We I think we came up with a pretty interesting instrument. Working together, collaboration is something I do enjoy. And I'm just so glad I had that opportunity, and we continue to have things in common. For example, right now, working on a little project to combine something that I created many years ago, really for the Omni bass, our bass NS upright bass, but with a 34-inch scale. We call it the Omni bass, and it's set up with a strap system, and what we call the boomerang strap. And now we're looking at how that could be of benefit to stick players. And nothing could be more fun for me than that whole circular connection among people who really care about making music, about the instruments they make the music with, and how to facilitate that process. So and if somehow this boomerang strap system that had a completely different motivation to make and so on, to create this particular strap system, but the whole idea was that it's versatile and you can put the instrument in any position and that kind of thing. And so all of a sudden, here's another opportunity to do something that could be of benefit for players. What could be more satisfying than that?
Well, obviously, creativity is one part of it, but one thing in the book that comes out too is the collaboration part. When do you decide to collaborate with other people or just work on a project yourself?
Well, I would say that generally speaking, if I have an opportunity to collaborate with someone, I go for it. Now, I mean, with people who I think that when we add the two together, we get a greater whole or whatever, that's extremely important. The collaboration that is doesn't go anywhere is no fun at all. It's about how you can combine resources, combine talents, combine experience and different viewpoints to create something that you couldn't create on your own. I mean, that's the idea of a collaboration. And also, frankly, my work is basically solitary. Design work is essentially solitary, especially for the kind of work I do. And so having an opportunity to do that work with other people and have it a more expansive experience in that way, that's always appealing to me. You know, for example, Emmett called me up at one point, before we got to do this NS stick together, and he had some things he wanted to do which he didn't feel he could really accomplish on his own, and thought that maybe as a team effort, we could do it. I jumped at the chance. So, and that has not changed now. I still, and even more so now for me later in my career, I have less, I don't have an infinite future, to do things coming up. I have to compress it into the next 10 years anyway. And so collaboration also can mean sharing the burden and getting more accomplished than you could accomplish on your own.
So Ned has a bit of a tell. And this kind of comes into play when, well, it's the story of that start of the book. And actually is in the book as well. And it's kind of shows up where in the Steinberger Sound days when he was doing the Trans Tram, and Jeff Babbitts tells the story. So I went to Ned with the idea for the book, and the first response was, well, I don't know, let me think about it. And that's the tell. As soon as he says, let me think about it, he's going to go off, and he kind of the wheels start turning. And, and so once you've got him thinking, then you're good, because then again, those wheels start turning, and he comes back, and it's, well, what about this? And what about that? And so the story of that book coming together, we went back and forth a few times until finally it was, yep, I'm in. And then once he was in, it was kind of all systems go, and away we go. So that's the tell. If you can get him to kind of go away and start thinking about things, and get the gears turning, then that's a pretty good indication that something could come out of it.
Well, the whole, question of the book was a bit different than collaborating on, because it isn't really a collaboration in the same, your book, you wrote it, about my work and my life. And that's different than collaboration as I'm used to it. Although there was obviously a lot of back and forth and we got to know each other and it was a great pleasure. But the collaborations that I've done with folks like Steve Grimes and Emmett, of course, and lots of others. And also I like to, I have a business, I have employees, we collaborate. I like to build a consensus with the folks I work with as much as possible and have a common, not just a common goal, but a sense of direction that we share. And, I like to hear about the reservations that people are having, and also collaboration with musical artists. I mean, every time I ask a musician a question, what about this? What about that? What would you, is this working for you? That's a collaboration. Because it's a learning process for me, and the results are different than they would have been if I hadn't sought that input. And I try when I do have conversations with musicians about instruments, I stress to them that I'm not interested in hearing how wonderful everything is. I'd rather know what's wrong with it, frankly, because that's what I can build on. That's what I can use as a springboard to making it better.
You talk about your creative process. Is it similar for each invention you're working on, or is it different each time?
It's an obsession in all cases. And that's how it works for me. If I have a problem, for me, it's all problem solving. And it's fun to solve problems. It's, sometimes you think you've solved a problem and you've created a worse problem, but the process of solving problems is really how it works. So, and if I've got, and these last years, I've done a lot of work on various gizmos, particularly in my work with the D'Addario company, which I'm very fortunate to have had the opportunity to work with Jim D'Addario and his team. These challenges come your way, and I love a good challenge because I get bored easily. It's if I go to the beach and I'm lying on the beach and getting the sun, I don't have that good a time, So it's fun to have a challenge, and then I get preoccupied with it, and sometimes I can't sleep at night because, it's not that I don't get enough sleep. I'm not asking for anybody to feel sorry for me or anything, but it's once that problem is lodged there and I don't have a solution for it, then I'm on it because I want that solution. I want to have an answer, and so that's that's the process, I guess. At least a big part of the process is that kind of addiction to the process, and so that's what and it's people throw out so and so is a genius or whatever, but I think it's more about determination than anything else, really.
Do you find that most of your inventions aren't sparks of inspiration? It's just a lot of work on a lot of little things, or have you had moments where it's like the aha moment and it happens for you?
Here's the thing: there are definitely aha moments for sure. Without those, I don't know how. If you're trying to solve a problem at a certain point, you go, aha, this is pretty interesting. Let me check this out. And then you check it out further and it's still looking good. But the thing is that You can have a great idea, but if you don't execute it properly, it can be wasted in that, you know, you got a great idea for a new, you know, headless bass, but you can't figure out how to get the neck straight and the strings, you know, and the intonation right and the balance right and all the other things that go with it. You miss on any one of those, including aesthetics are extremely important in a musical instrument for, you know, for good reason. I mean, after all, this is for a musician, you know, a painter is in his studio painting a painting and nobody sees the brush or, you know, the process is private. But when you are performing music, this is a very public thing. And the way you present yourself is important. So aesthetics are extremely important. All of that is part of the game, and solving those problems too. It's a big problem with headless is, what's it going to look like? You can't just take a Fender bass and chop the head off it and say, okay, this is the new product. Not going to work. People are going to go, hey, you just decapitated my bass. What are you talking about? So then you have to develop an aesthetic to support it. So that was an extremely important and challenging part of the process.
You mentioned hits and misses, and obviously the book documents a lot of the hits. Obviously fans of your work know those, they own a lot of those. Would you categorize any misses on things?
Oh, I missed so many times, and there's so many stillborn design projects that deserved to be so. I mean, that's kind of cruel to say. I mean, yeah. But still, but I'd say one of the things when I look back on the work I've done and the things I've most that I feel have been most successful. I mean, but you know, successful is not just how much other people appreciate it necessarily, but my own view of it. And I look back on the Synapse line that I did for a Steinberger brand for the Gibson Company, was some close to 20 years ago now. And I was motivated by the best of intentions. I was looking to create an instrument that would balance well, you know, without the need for the pivot plate that we had on the original Steinbergers, and which I've always been amazed at how well accepted that was, considering how radical it was. And you know, when I originally designed Steinberger bass, I was not expecting anywhere near the level of acceptance that we had for it. It wasn't about creating an instrument that you know, Sting and the Rolling Stones and Eddie Van Halen would be playing. You know, it was just a kind of a personal expression, an alternative, something that I hoped somebody would benefit from and value. But you know, that's the way it worked out, that it became a larger thing. But the main impetus was to, you know, just to create something that solved a problem. And of course, the headless was all about balance, and it did turn out to be something that people could relate to. But now you've got a pivot plate on the back of the instrument. You're asking a lot of a player to make that much of an adjustment from their conventional, you know, what they've been playing their whole lives with, you know, and all of a sudden you turn it upside down. So I did feel that creating an instrument that would balance well without the pivot was important. And then I created this arm that sticks out from the instrument, and it was not well received, I think. I mean, and when I look back on it, I think that I wasn't able to combine the aesthetic with the functionality. I'm very functionally oriented. I mean, it's got to work, and I'm focused on that, and how to make the make it work and have that visual appeal, that's where that particular product was disappointing, I think, really, and I didn't really hit the mark. I have since then I've worked on that, and I'm excited to say that I've overcome those. I've taken a little bit different approach to it, with some new things I'm doing now that I'm very excited about, that address that issue in a way that is more exciting aesthetically, which is hugely important. Again, for any musical instrument, the way it looks is as important as anything else. Really, it's the reality.
It's interesting too, and I go back to those Steinberger guitars and basses in the 80s, and they were such a reflection of the time, you know, and they were space age, and they were forward thinking, and they were, you know, and that was, you know, when the the early 80s, when computers were coming in, and, you know, videos were coming in, and it really kind of, you know, serendipitously matched with that. Like they kind of went hand in hand. The visual aesthetic that you were able to present there reflected the, you know, the skinny ties and the bright colors, and the you know, video killed the radio star, that whole aesthetic that was going on there as well, which was different in kind of the late 1990s and early 2000s when the Synapse was coming out. And interesting too that we're in a different time as well. And you look at instruments now, and I'm thinking of the resurgence of headless instruments and all the companies that are making them, and, you know, custom headless instruments, you know, and high-end Federa's has a headless model as well. So even like the high-end custom luthiers are embracing that headless design. So again, a different time, a different aesthetic here as well. And that instrument kind of both reflecting that and creating that at the same time. It's an interesting comparison, interesting reality.
Well, I was very lucky because in the 80s, early 80s especially, there was a thirst for high tech among guitar players, which completely evaporated by the end of that decade. It was quite an amazing turnaround. So I was lucky to have this new innovative product at a time when people were excited about innovation and technology and how it could be applied to a guitar. But then people, you know, in the late 80s, there was this strong reaction against that, and, you know, towards vintage, which I understand why people might want to be oriented that way. But and now it's more open to innovation again. So fashion is also a big part of the whole, the reality of musical instruments. People, and of course, the repertoire is very important too, because there's so much great music created with electric instruments, guitars and basses, where in the beginning, you know, when Leo Fender brought out the Fender bass, you know, the P bass or whatever, there was no repertoire. So it was an open world. But now you have all this music that was created on a precision bass, and it's natural that people want to keep playing those instruments because that's the sound,
Sure.
you know, that is defined by these great music from that era. So a lot of players want to stay with those traditional instruments because that's what the music was made on. But the interesting thing is, when music was made, they weren't traditional instruments. They were brand new. So, hey, you know, you might consider thinking about where you could go today that would be fun and rewarding.
That's interesting.
Do you find some of that innovation in the electric bode because it's not as mature of a market?
Definitely. The electric bode is a whole different world.
Yeah.
It is been delayed for, you know, electric guitars, acoustic guitars, they're kind of if you talk to a guitar player, more or less 50-50 chance they might be acoustic player or electric player. They kind of acoustic and electric share the stage equally. With bowed instruments, not at all. You know, at least 90% of bowed play, you know, violin, viola, cello, and double bass. They play acoustic. They love acoustic. They don't want to know anything about electric, you know. So we've got 10% maybe they're going, yeah, I play electric too, or I play electric exclusively. So that's a great opportunity, actually, in that there's so many players out there who are not enjoying the benefits of an electric instrument, and there are many benefits. You know, there is something absolutely fundamentally beautiful about an acoustic instrument that an electric instrument really, in many ways, cannot equal. And you know, a lot of my competitors who make electric instruments, and not just my, but a lot of people who are interested in electric instruments and make electric instruments, their goal is to make an electric instrument that is as much like an acoustic instrument as possible, but you can plug it in and be louder and put it in a smaller box, you know, for portability. But I don't think of it that way. I see electric instruments as an opportunity to go to new places. And I really am not so interested in imitating an acoustic instrument as much as I am about expanding the tone palette and the expressive opportunity that you can have with an electric instrument.
Yeah, and that's interesting too. And I see a lot of young people, you know, playing bowed electric instruments now, and effects on it as well. That's been a huge thing, you know, the looping and that piece as well. So to open up that vocabulary to a classical player has been pretty exciting. And I'm really encouraged to see a lot of young people picking it up, and again, young musicians, and you know, not just bringing it on stage and trying to recreate that acoustic instrument, but again, adding the electronics, adding that piece to it as well.
And here's the thing about the bowed world, and that these guys, guitar players come basically, they get a guitar when they're 12 or 15 or 18, and this great folk music and rock music and all, and they're just, you know, teach themselves, and it's this great thing. Bowed players mostly come from classical training. It's a very different world. And right now, it's very tough to make a living with classical music, frankly. It's a very tough time. There isn't that big an audience, partly because there's so much great pop music out there that really it's heavy competition, especially for young people. So serious musicians or talented musicians who have, you know, creative people, they're not that interested necessarily in, you know, being in a quartet and playing Beethoven and Handel or whatever, Haydn rather, I meant to say. So this is a great opportunity for them to expand their horizons and create a commercial opportunity. You know, just to be able to, I'm not big into really loud music personally. I'll be frank about it. You know, I go to a concert and they blow my ears out, and I get angry. You know, why are you doing that? You know, but on the other hand, you know, you're at a wedding, you know, and you've got a little band there to play the wedding. Hey, you want to be heard, and these instruments are the way to go. And another dimension of what's going on with electric bowed instruments is now with the COVID virus situation. And by the way, I hope you enjoy I'm enjoying my long hair here. I haven't had it cut in, you know, 10 weeks or whatever.
Don't rub it in, Ned.
Yeah. All right. I'm sorry. I'm forgetting you're sensitive on that subject, Andy. So, but to be able to, you know, plug into your computer and, you know, share your music with people, regardless of the fact that your children are having a fight in the back room there or whatever, and and just to be able to practice at home without disturbing, your parents or your children, depending on which end of the spectrum you're on. All of that is, for the practical advantages of electric instruments are very compelling.
Did you find your design process was different once you got into electric boat, or did it follow a similar process from when you were working with electric guitars and basses?
I would say that, it's a question of trying to, I think the process is very similar. Now, I was more mature when I got involved with electric bowed instruments. When I started out with Stewart Spector at the beginning, I not only was I just a kid, but I was ignorant, of so many things. And one of the things now that when I got into bowed electric, I had already gone through a lot of a learning process, and I had a lot more knowledge. And I have a lot more knowledge today than I had then. And the work I did on the pickups was very important in terms of my expanding my horizons and with piezo pickups, which are key to bowed electrics. And actually, one of the big reasons why bowed electric instruments are so much later to the game than electric guitars and basses is that the magnetic pickup, which was invented early in the 20th century, are particularly well suited to plucked instruments because of the sensitivity that they have more up and down sensitivity, which is similar to an acoustic instrument, whereas bowed instruments, you need to have side to side sensitivity that magnetic pickups have a very difficult time with that. And that's not what they naturally do. And whereas the piezo pickup now all of a sudden opened up new horizons. And that was only really made available maybe in the 70s and 80s. I don't have the history exactly, but the point is that it's much more recent. And it takes time, for people to figure out what's going on. People like me, I wasn't there when they invented the piezo pickup. I sort of learned about it further down the road. But those of us who were involved in electric bowed instruments, the piezo pickup is extremely important because you can get the sensitivity in the direction you want it to be. And I did a lot of work on that and learned a lot there. It was a huge challenge, but again, I do enjoy a challenge.
And kind of going back to the book a little bit, Jim, you obviously spent a lot of time with Ned, talking with him about all the things that he's done, lots of people who've worked with him. What was your biggest surprise?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know. I don't know if there was like really a surprise, but I think it's more just the consistency. You talk about, does the design process change? And I really don't think, from again, talking to people even before he was making musical instruments, making cabinets at at the Woodworkers Co-op, I just don't think it has changed. Maybe that's the surprise. It's just that consistency from project to project and task to task, and just that openness and that eagerness and that really questioning mindset that he's applies to all the different projects and things that happen there. So again, maybe not a surprise, but maybe that consistency that again is has been there all along. Even actually to go right back to when he was 12 years old in the wood shop in his parents' in his parents' basement, which is really the start of this thing. Honestly, was that aha moment when, geez, he can do this. I can do this with my hands. I can make things that are cool and people like. And that was the start of that journey. And to see that really continuing, and looking at the picture of him in his wood shop right now, and in a lot of ways it's still the same excitement and that creative young mind, exploring new things and building and creating.
I hate to tell you, I do not have a young mind. Okay, but that's that's just a technicality. But For me now, really the challenge is to make the most of all that I've learned and to apply that to current projects and to take advantage of that and share as much of that as I can, because if I have some insight into a way to do something that's of value, that comes from all these years of experience, all the know-how that I have, and I have, you know, I don't wouldn't know how to fix the problems that our country is facing. Okay, I don't have that kind of know-how, but I know how a tremolo works real well, and all that kind of stuff. And so to apply that over these next years that I still have, hopefully, ahead of me, that's something that I take a lot of pleasure in doing, and I think it has value.
Yeah.
Well,
And maybe the mind isn't young, but the excitement is still there. And that's the piece that I'm going to say is probably consistent, is that still excitement. And, you know, talking about the project with the boomerang strap and just that excitement about, you know, it seems like a small thing, but it's still, you know, there's an excitement in your voice when we talk about that, which is really cool.
Going through the book and going through the process of basically a biography, did it change you in any way? Did it give you some perspective on things you've done? Anything like that?
Well, it certainly made me, you know, especially during the time when Jim was interviewing me and asking me to think about these different phases of my career. Certainly that helped me to understand myself a little bit better. And having a book that is written about you and your work in your lifetime is kind of a weird, kind of bizarre experience for me. But one way I certainly so much appreciate the opportunity to be understood and to have people interested in the work and the process and so on. But it's a little strange, I would have to say, particularly because I have it's not my style to push myself too much I don't front the band that well. That's not my thing, you know. I try to just, you know, do my work and try to make it as good as it can be. But being in the limelight that way is, it's not all that completely comfortable. I mean, I'm not complaining, don't get me wrong, but it's still a little awkward for me working through it.
What do you think the biggest takeaway from the book is, Jim?
In terms of Ned's story, or just the, like, in terms of what, Andy?
Yeah, really, Ned's story overall. You know, obviously people are interested in Ned, and that's why we're talking. What do you think your biggest takeaway and what the book's takeaway is?
So again, I think there's a couple of key points, and I want to go back to kind of the Emmett book as well. For me, the question is always why. Like, why does this happen? Why does this person, you know? And again, to go back to Stickman in the Emmett book, like, why does this guy flip his guitar upside down and start tapping, like, and then make an instrument for that? That, you know, and with Ned, it's the same thing. Why do you cut the head off the instrument and do this thing? It doesn't make sense. So really, it was uncovering that moment, and I don't want to give it away, except to say that in the Emmett book, it was right at the very, very end, and I worked on that for a long time. That was kind of a project that I picked on for years and years. But it was the very last interview, you know, it was kind of an additional thing. The book was pretty much done. And so it was right at the very, very end where suddenly, that spark goes off and there you go. That's why. For this book and Ned's story, it happens much sooner. Like why does he do this? And why do again, this particular individual, why did he do this thing? And that reason happens again quite early in the book and follows through the rest of the book. So for me, that's going to be the takeaway, is uncovering the reason for that creative impulse, right? And like, Ned said earlier, it's one thing to have that aha moment. It's another thing to spend years and years and hours and time and money and, blood, sweat, and tears to actually make it happen,
That's
and
the
literally.
rough part. Yeah, I would love to cut some of that out of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, when I think back on some of the disasters that I created in my career, I just it's full of pitfalls, and so why do you keep doing it? Because what else are you going to do? I didn't really feel I had I didn't see it as a choice. It was an obsession, whatever, an addiction. I wanted to keep at it because I just, otherwise I would be wouldn't know what to do with myself, frankly. I mean, I've got a wonderful family now, and they're a welcome distraction for sure. But still, the work is very important to me, and I want to carry that work on as long as I can, because that's what I enjoy.
Yeah. And that's really what the book explores, is that that connection and that energy that you get. And again, so the energy that you get from the work and the energy that you give through the work, and exploring that relationship between the creation, the creator, and then the person playing it. So there's that you're that kind of intermediary step between the tool and the person who's implementing that tool, who's using that, and exploring that relationship too. And really, again, digging down into that relationship and that exchange of energy. There's a huge
one of the things that definitely sustains me is that occasional moment when somebody sends me an email or whatever and says, I was inspired to do some music, because of your instrument, or that your instrument inspired me to create. And that is the most magical image for me, or whatever. That's what I get the most satisfaction from, is thinking that actually somebody was able to create some art that I helped them with. And that's more than anything else what keeps me going.
Through your career, have there been any moments that were particularly poignant for you in regards to those performances, artists that you heard or saw or interacted with?
I guess I would have to say that probably I was most moved, and this was quite a while ago, and this was early on in the development of video and interactive video, and I was invited, and I'm so terrible with names, I really wish I could remember who it was, invited me this evening to watch an interactive video with King Crimson and Tony Levin. And Tony was so great in this performance, and he was playing, the NS upright bass, and he was leading the band. And that's one of the things about a bass player that my son is a bass player. He's 18 years old and very talented. He gets that from his mother, so I've learned a little bit more, watching him develop as a bassist, and with his high school groups that he plays with, and they're going to miss him dearly because they don't have another bass player like Lucas to fill in right away. I mean, maybe 2 years from now they will, but that's the way it is with a high school band. Sometimes you got a great bass player, another time you might have a relatively great. I don't mean that Lucas is, on the level of Tony Levin, but still he's very talented. And so I've learned from him how much a bass player really runs the band, and that's something I saw with Tony. Maybe these other guys are taking these fancy solos and everything, which Tony is not into that at all. He's into playing the bass and whatever that involves in terms of making the band work and making the music more valuable and meaningful. And just watching him do it, so beautifully, so powerfully, so without affect, but just with soul. That's one moment I remember watching that video, and the tears came to my eyes that I participated in that. I made that instrument for him, to play, and he's making this great music with it. It's very moving for me. And there's many other times when it's been moving. I've also gone to see concerts where I came away scratching my head going, was that music? It's like, but that's, I'm not into judging musicians. I want to say that very, very clearly. I admire musicians. They do what I could never do. And they are so important for our culture and society. And I just have the, and I admire musicians more than they admire themselves because, it's something I could never do. I just don't have it. And when I see what people can do with their music, I'm just so happy to be supporting that work that they do.
I'll ask you, Jim, because I know with COVID, that's kind of affected the book publishing industry and every industry. On a personal note, let me just say, Ned, I've known you for 20 years. We've had many, many conversations on the phone. I've gotten to know you. I do think the book captures your spirit very well. And even though a lot of these stories I've heard and some of these people I've talked about, there was a ton that I learned. And so I know anybody that's a fan of your work will definitely learn a lot, not only about specifics, but a little bit about the background and the process that you use. What's the best way for people to order the book, Jim?
Oh, good question. So first of all, though, Andy, I have to thank you for that. Like you have a big part of this story too, and your website, steinbergerworld.com, was a huge reference and resource for me. And one quick little story: the book was actually ready to go. I was doing one of the final checks, and I was reading through it, and I read this date, and I thought, oh, geez, I think I've got this wrong. So I called up Ned in a panic. I said, Ned, we got to touch base. And I said, well, was that NAMM show in like 83 or 82, or like what did that work? And I said to Ned, I said, my biggest fear is that Andy's going to call me up and say, Jim, you got that wrong. And so Ned talked me off the ledge, and he said, no, it's here. This is there. So to have, your stamp of approval on it means a lot to me. And, again, that's, I can't ask for a better recommendation than the one coming from you. So I appreciate that.
It's the book I wish I wrote.
Well, there you go.
Oh, so, but how can people order it? What's the best way for people to get a hand?
Rowman & Littlefield is the publisher, so it's on all the Amazon sites. With the situation that the world is in right now, the publishing world has paused, which I think was quite appropriate. And again, we had plans for a big launch and all that with the book that didn't happen, which again is really appropriate. And I kind of like how it's just kind of softly come out. And I know people do have copies of it. All the pre-sales went out and orders are still getting filled. So you can absolutely get it. So a couple ways, Rowman & Littlefield, but go through Amazon. The other thing is to go to my website, so jimreilly.ca, REILLY.ca, and then you can link on right on my homepage. There's a thing that says Steinberger book. and that'll take you to that as well. And there's actually a discount code there as well if you go directly to my website. So feel free to do that. That'll take you again to the Roman and Littlefield site that you can apply the code to and get a discount there as well.
Excellent. Do I have to ask, do you know who your next topic is going to be?
I do. I've actually got a couple things on the go. And I'll tease you. I'm not going to tell you actually what it is, but the one is actually pretty cool. And I really see it kind of as the completion of the Builder trilogy. So we start with Emmett, who is the technique. We go to Ned, who is the instrument. And then the third one is the voice of the instrument. So that's at the beginning stages, and I've been doing some interviews and starting that. The other one, so kind of working on two simultaneously, is really diving into that vintage instrument. And what is the appeal of the vintage instrument? And what's the difference between an old instrument and a vintage instrument? And really uncovering that. And actually, that's really interesting too. There's a nice stories come together there of the birth of that vintage marketplace, and some of the key players that were sort of involved in that back in the late 60s and early 70s, when people realized that, you know, the brand new Fender guitar didn't sound quite as good as the one that was, you know, 7 or 8 years older, and that 7 or 8 year older was way cheaper, you know. So then how that vintage market created and how it's continued to this day. And again, that difference between what makes something vintage as opposed to just old. So those are the two projects that are in the works right now.
Looking forward to it. I'll have to wrap up with you, Ned, and ask the question. I don't know how much you're willing to share, but what things are you working on right now that are exciting you?
Well, I'm actually been very busy lately and working on a lot of new things I'm excited about. Those things that are more in their early stages are really not easy to share in a productive way. But there's in terms of NS design, we are working on some exciting new instruments there. You know, 6-string bass guitars, 6-string violins. Other evolution of the violin technology that I'm working on that I'm excited about. So this is a lot of good stuff happening there. Also, I have some work I'm doing with tremolo mechanisms, actually, new versions of tremolos that are always been a fun challenge for me. And of course, there's always the work I'm doing with the Dario, and there's always something new on the horizon there in terms of accessories, gizmos that are of value to musicians. And so I have a lot of fun with that, and there's just a lot of good things going on there too. So a lot on the table, and I'm just really, one of the things I'm doing right now is trying to make sure that I focus as much as possible on those kinds of projects that I really care about, and try not to get too bogged down with, business considerations, and of course there's all kinds of challenges that we face with our with NS design business, with the COVID virus, and so on. But all of that's going pretty well. And again, my goals are to stay focused on the work that I love and the work that I do best, which is not being a businessman, it's being a designer. So that's where my heart lies, and that's where my focus will be going forward.
Well, I know I've been a longtime fan. I'm sure that Jim has been a longtime fan, and I know there are lots of people out there that are equally as enthusiastic about your work and can't wait to see all the things that your mind creates.
Well, it's one thing your mind, but you also have to actually, make the stuff in the flesh. It's not just up here. And one of the coolest things, I just end with this, is the technical opportunities we have today, especially with 3-dimensional printing and all you can do with that. it's very exciting and it motivates me, and there's things I can do today that I couldn't have done. I mean, I still have upstairs in my shop here, I have my old drawing board. You know, it's big drawing board that I used to spend so much time in front of. Now I spend my time in front of this screen, which I would complain about, except that it's so much better than my drawing board ever was. So it's fun to engage in these projects with the power of the technology that is available to us now. So a lot of possibilities that were not possible before, and I just want to do everything I can to make the most of that opportunity.
Well, I want to thank you for this opportunity, both of you. It's been great to catch up with you, to learn more about this, especially to talk more about the book. And again, I want everybody to try and pick one up and learn a little bit more about you.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate connecting with you as well.
Thank you, Andy. You've been, Andy and I go way back, and I love Andy on so many levels. Thank you.
And there you have it. Thanks for watching this video. Again, if you haven't picked up the book, please do so by going to Jim Reilly's website at jimreilly.ca. Big thanks to Jim and Ned, especially Ned for his kind words there at the end. Please share your thoughts in the comments below and share the video as well. Who knows? If we get enough likes, maybe I can convince Ned to do something like this on a regular basis. Thanks again, stay safe, and stay headless.